On December 2, 1851, Louis Bonaparte, nephew of the famous Napoleon, staged a coup in France. He dissolved the elected assembly and declared himself ruler. This shocked everyone in Europe. Liberals saw it as the evil act of a villain. Others saw it as a strange blessing that stopped a workers' revolution. Marx set out to explain what really happened. He wrote the 18th Brumaire to challenge two popular explanations. Victor Hugo said the coup was all but one man's ambition, which made Louis Bonaparte seem powerful rather than pathetic. Pierre Joseph Proudhon said it was just the natural flow of history which ended up excusing the dictator. Marx took a different approach. He showed how the struggle between social classes in France created the conditions that allowed a mediocre man to seize power. Marx's text is not just history, it is a work of political theory that explains how the state works, how class conflict shapes events, and how crises unfold. Marx opens with a famous line about history repeating itself. He says, Hegel once noted that great historical events appear twice. But Marx adds that the first time comes as tragedy, the second time as farce. The Great French Revolution of 1789 was a tragedy. The coup of 1851 was a ridiculous imitation. This leads to one of Marx's most important insights about how history works. He writes that people make their own history, but they do not make it under conditions they choose. They make it under conditions handed down from the past. The tradition of all dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living. During the Great Revolution, the French bourgeoisie dressed themselves in Roman costumes. They spoke like Roman senators and acted like Roman heroes. This helped them hide the fact that their struggle was really about money and commerce. They needed this grand illusion to give themselves the courage to smash feudalism and build capitalism. Once that was done, the Roman ghost disappeared and the sober reality of business took over. But in 1848, things were different. The French nation was terrified of the working class, so it ran backward, hiding behind the myth of Napoleon. This was not a heroic struggle for a new future. It was a pathetic retreat into old fantasies. Marx says that future revolutions must learn from this. They cannot borrow their poetry from the past, they must look to the future. To explain how Louis Bonaparte rose to power, Marx carefully examines the class struggles in France between 1848 and 1851. He divides this period into three phases. First came the February Revolution of 1848. This was a brief moment when everyone seemed united. The workers had weapons and forced the new government to declare a social republic. But this was just a phrase. It did not match the real situation. Second came the establishment of the bourgeois republic. The new assembly tried to push the revolution toward moderate business-friendly policies. The workers responded with the June insurrection. This was a massive uprising by the Paris proletariat. But they were crushed by a huge coalition that included bankers, industrialists, the middle class, the army, the church, and even the peasantry. Thousands were killed and deported. This defeat proved that a republic under capitalism could never be neutral. It would always serve the interests of the wealthy class. Third came the period from 1849 to 1851, when the ruling coalition began to fall apart. Once the workers were defeated, the ruling class turned on its own allies. Every demand for reform was attacked as socialism. In doing so, the bourgeoisie destroyed its own political power. One of Marx's key contributions is his analysis of divisions within the capitalist class. The dominant political force was the Party of Order, which contained two royalist factions. The Legitimists supported the old Bourbon royal family, the Orleanists supported the House of Orleans. On the surface, they seemed divided by ideology and loyalty to different kings, but Marx strips away this illusion. The real difference was material. The Legitimists represented big landowners with feudal roots. The Orleanists represented bankers and industrialists with modern capital. Their political ideas were just the surface expression of their economic interests. This leads to a crucial point about political representation. Democratic politicians may come from different backgrounds, but what makes them representatives of a class is that their minds cannot go beyond the limits that their class cannot go beyond. Their ideas are shaped by their material position in society. Perhaps the most important part of Marx's analysis is his theory of the state. In earlier Marxist thought, the state was simply the tool of the ruling class. But in this text, Marx shows something more complex. The state can grow so powerful that it seems to stand above society. Marx describes the French state as an immense bureaucratic monster. It had 500,000 officials and 500,000 soldiers. This machine had been built over centuries. Absolute monarchy created it to crush feudal lords. The first Napoleon perfected it. Later regimes expanded it by creating more government jobs. During the struggle against the workers, the parliamentary republic strengthened this machine even more. Every social interest became an interest of the state, but in perfecting this machine to crush the working class, the bourgeoisie created a weapon that could be turned against them. Marx concludes that all revolutions had perfected the state machine instead of destroying it. This is a crucial insight. The state had become so powerful that it no longer needed a sophisticated ideology. It could be run by a corrupt adventurer backed by drunken soldiers. Under Louis Bonaparte, the executive power appeared completely independent, floating above society. But Marx insists that the state power was not floating in midair, it was anchored in the class dynamics of the peasantry. How did Louis Bonaparte win an overwhelming mandate from the voters? Marx answers by analyzing the French peasantry. Marx compares the small-holding peasants to a sack of potatoes. They live in similar conditions, but they are isolated from each other. Their mode of production keeps them apart. They have no national organization and no political unity. They share common interests, but they cannot act together. Because of this fragmentation, the peasants cannot represent themselves. They must be represented. Their political representative must appear as their master, an absolute authority sent from above to protect them. This made the myth of Napoleon deeply attractive to them. However, Marx makes an important distinction. The conservative peasant wants to hold on to their small property and stay within the old order. But the revolutionary peasant wants to break out of their narrow conditions and ally with the workers. Over time, the peasants were being crushed by debt and exploitation. Capital had replaced the old feudal lords. This created a natural bond between peasants and workers as both were exploited by the same master. The final piece of Marx's theory is his account of the Lumen proletariat. This is the underworld of society. Criminals, vagrants, discharged soldiers, swindlers, gamblers, prostitutes, and beggars. The whole disorganized mass that society rejects. Louis Bonaparte recognized this class as his only reliable base. He positioned himself as their chief. This revealed the deep contradictions of his regime. He had to protect bourgeois property while stripping the bourgeoisie of political power. He tried to please all classes but could not only give to one by stealing from another. His government was defined by confused, erratic policies that undermined the entire state. Marx ended with a prophecy. He said, the Bonapartist regime would eventually collapse from its own contradictions. When the imperial mantle finally fell on Louis Bonaparte, the bronze statue of Napoleon would come crashing down from its column. This text remains a powerful warning. When the ruling class is terrified by the threat of social revolution, it will sacrifice its own democracy and liberty to protect its property. In doing so, it creates an autonomous state apparatus that rules by force, ultimately paving the way for its own destruction.